Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome on SNUI, the online spiritualist community. Our guest tonight is Minister Steven Upton. Welcome, Steven, and thank you for joining us. Minister Steven Upton will share with us tonight the first part of a talk on trance. The second part will be online tomorrow, always in this room at 7 p.m. UK. But before we start, I want just to inform you that this session will be recorded. So it's up to you if you like to leave your camera on or off. Microphones are muted at all time, unless Steven will ask you to come in the room for your questions or comments. And then the microphone will be automatically unmuted for you. So Steven, welcome, and I give you the platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela. And good evening, everyone, or good day, wherever it is you live. I've been in lockdown now for, about 3 weeks, so long, I've started having some in-depth conversations with both Sooty and Gromit upon the meaning of life. In fact, both of them have come along this evening to support me. They're just behind me. And we've all agreed that the meaning of life is 42. But that's the subject for another lecture. So this evening, this has been advertised as the first part of a two-part lecture on trance mediumship. I don't intend taking any questions during the body of the lecture, but I am allowing time towards the end to answer any questions or to clarify any points that you may have got misunderstood or confused about. When it comes to answer for questions, you'll need to raise the blue hand to attract my attention, then I'll turn your microphone on and invite you to ask your question. I won't be reading questions from the chat box. I found that the thing keeps moving up so quickly that I can't focus upon it. So when the time comes, you'll raise your blue hand. If you don't know where it is, you need to open up the participants part of the Zoom facility, and you'll find a little button that says raise hand. But you won't need that for now, for the next hour perhaps. The first thing we need to do is just study this word trance for a moment, because I actually don't think it's a very good word for what it is we're dealing with, the subject we're dealing with. It's a more modern use term word and not the traditional word or term that was used many years ago. If I said to you, let's go to a demonstration of healing mediumship, you would know exactly what the purpose of that is. The word mediumship implies it's going to be some form of interaction between our world and what we term as the spirit world. And in the title, the word healing tells us exactly what type of mediumship. So healing mediumship, the object is for a medium to access the healing powers. If I said to you, let's go and see a demonstration of communicating mediumship, again, you'd know precisely what it is we're going to. It would be a demonstration where the medium will communicate with people believed to have died to provide evidence of survival. So therefore, in those two titles, healing and communicating clearly describes what the purpose is of that type of mediumship. Now, if we start talking about trance mediumship, that would imply that the purpose is therefore to be in trance, and it's not. So we first need to define exactly what the purpose of this is, and also the role that trance plays within this process. For what I'm going to put to you is, trance isn't the purpose, trance is a tool that enables the purpose. The purpose, first and foremost, is to allow an external intelligence to exercise control over the medium. And we can do this for various purposes, which we'll come to later. So the actual purpose isn't necessarily to be in trance. The purpose is actually for control. The one thing that our friends and helpers in the spirit world don't have is a physical body. If they want to interact with us in various ways, the most common way today is through the mind of the medium. Now, if they want to be able to speak to us right now, we don't have a physical medium present that can enable either direct or independent voice phenomena, but we can't hear their vocal cords because they don't have a physical body to be able to vibrate the air and create sound waves. What they can do, however, is borrow one. So in effect, as a control medium, what we are doing for a temporary period, a short period of time, is lending certain physical capabilities to the minds of those in the spirit world who otherwise would have difficulty manifesting here. If we're doing it for example, controlled writing, we're allowing them to control the hand of the medium with a pen or pencil and to write. Controlled painting. Many of you may be aware of Jose Madrado. I've seen him demonstrate numerous times, and in the controlled state, he great masters such as Van Gogh, Monet, etc., control him to paint. And on many occasions, they don't even use brushes, they use his hands. There's a canvas and there's oils. He squidges oils all over the canvas. It's almost like dives in with his hands. And after a period of very often as little as 4 or 5 minutes, holding up a canvas, and you've got a Picasso, a Monet, a Renoir, Rembrandt. Now, if I, in my normal state, squidged oils onto a canvas and mixed them all up with my hands, I would have brown. A study of a ploughed field at night. No, not with Jose. He gets a Monet or a Picasso. Quite remarkable to watch. But what effectively is happening, his physical body or parts of it are being controlled by an external intelligence. So first and foremost, we now need to get the title of this mediumship right. It isn't trance mediumship. In reality, the best name for it is control mediumship. So how do we define control mediumship? I'm just going to bring up a slide for you. Hopefully all this works. And on my secondary screen, I can see we've got it. So how do we define it? The purpose of control mediumship, I put brackets in trance, and if you want to take a screenshot of any of these slides, please feel free to do so. So the purpose, to demonstrate either a superior knowledge or ability that the medium does not possess in the normal state of consciousness. That's how we assess it. When we're assessing a trance medium, that's what we're looking for. A superior knowledge or ability that the medium does not possess in their normal state of consciousness. So going back to Jose Madrado, that would be regarded as a superior ability. In the normal state of consciousness, he cannot produce Monets and Picassos in 4 or 5 minutes with his hands and oils. No brushes, nothing at all other than hands, oils, canvas, 4 or 5 minutes, and he gets wonderful paintings. That would be a superior ability he does not possess in his normal state of consciousness. Another example would be the control medium Estelle Roberts. In her normal state of consciousness, she could only speak English. Yet, in the controlled state, she was known to speak up to 19 different languages fluently. If you went for a trance sitting with her, and for example you were Dutch, the sitting would be conducted in Dutch. If you were German, German. So that is another example of a superior ability. I'm just going to end the share for a moment, and so you can look at me again, and I'll come back to that shortly. So that is how we define it. So we think about this then as the controlled state. Why is it then that I said at the beginning, trance is only but a tool? I need to explain that to you now. In a normal state of consciousness, as I'm in now, I'm using my own intellect, my own knowledge, my own memory to deliver this information to you. It's coming entirely from myself. And at the moment, I am using all of my own mental resources. If I wanted to allow spirit control to have some control over me to speak to you, to write, or if we're going to do it for healing, I would have to start not using, or I would stop using, or reduce my use of my own mental faculties. In a sense, we could say my mind at the moment is too active for me to be controlled. If I wanted to allow myself to be controlled right now, I would have to allow or to move or somehow have my consciousness moved from its current active state into a far more passive state. And that is the whole key to this, how that happens. Come back to that in a moment. But think of it like this. If I was stood on one side of the motorway and you were stood on the other, under normal times, not today where there's no traffic, under normal times where all that traffic's so busy, the noise of the traffic, even if I shouted at you at the top of my voice, you wouldn't hear me because the noise of the traffic. If I wanted you to hear me, we'd have to stop the traffic, or at the very least, slow it down. Equate that now to the controlled state. My mind, my consciousness right now has too much traffic going through it. If I wanted to allow an external intelligence to exercise control over me, we're going to have to slow the traffic down. You understand it that way? See one or two nods. Good. So the question then comes, isn't why or how this is done at the moment. The real question in this is, how does a medium have their consciousness moved from its normal active state into a more passive state? Now, there are a lot of misunderstandings about this type of mediumship, and I need to deal with one right now. And that is, a lot of people think that trance mediums are in an unconscious state and have no awareness of what's taking place. For the vast majority, that is not true. And we will cover that more later, because there are different types of control mediums. But certainly for myself, when I'm in the controlled state to allow them to speak through me, I always have some degree of awareness. When I'm in a trance healing sitting controlled state, I mostly have an awareness, but there are times when I'm in what we term deep trance. By definition, deep trance means I'm completely unconscious and have no awareness of what's taking place. I would say possibly 1 in 40, 1 in every 50 trance healing sittings, I could very well be in that deep trance state. I do on average in a normal year, certainly not this year, but in a normal year, 800 to 900 trance healing sittings in a year. So it's quite often I can be in that state. But clearly we can see it varies, and there's going to be a reason for that, which we'll come back to. But what I want you to understand is, this is not simple as put the medium unconscious and the spirit world can do what they like with them. Because the vast majority are not unconscious. So the state we need to be thinking about, stop thinking about either consciousness and unconscious, think about an active mind and a passive mind. And when we think that way, all aspects of mental mediumship can be broken down into 2 broad categories: active mental mediumship and passive mental mediumship. Communicative mediumship is very active, probably why I don't like it and not terribly good at it. You have to work quite hard. You perceive information through your various senses, and you have to work quite hard assembling it, understanding it, and in many cases interpreting subliminal images, feelings, etc., into a coherent statement. active mental mediumship. The medium is generally working harder, the mind working quicker than a normal state of consciousness. Passive mental mediumship, healing mediumship, control mediumship, and generally speaking as well, physical mediumship, the medium's going to be very passive. So the mind needs to be moved somehow from its normal active state into a passive state. And I want to introduce to you now, I'm going to go back to the share screen mode, and I want to introduce someone to you now, which is the source of this information. This is James Johnson Morse. He's still regarded today, even though he passed the spirit world 101 years ago, in 1919, he's still regarded today as one of the finest trance mediums we've ever produced in the era we call modern spiritualism. Remarkable man, had very little orthodox schooling. I think I'm correct in saying about 6 months. At the age of 10, he was homeless, looking for work, but yet he became such an eloquent speaker. He was quite remarkable. In the 1880s, he was British, of course. In the 1880s, he was invited to go to the United States of America to deliver a series of trance lectures. Now today we have trance speakers, and in fact in 2 days' time, Minister Steven will be giving a demonstration of trance speaking upon this very format. But trance lectures is something that happened a lot in the 19th century, but today I actually don't know of one. It's something we have been talking about recently, Judy and myself, and it's something we may hopefully explore later. But trance lectures were very interesting. For example, Emma Hardinge Britton, as a trance lecturer, she would go to a town where she was unknown and knew of no one. There may be 400 or 500 people present in a theatre, and she would be moved into the trance state, and then from amongst that audience, they would select maybe 4 or 5 prominent people from that community, usually the mayor, the doctor, the teacher, etc. And they would select a topic for the spirit control to lecture them upon. And regardless of what they chose, with no prior knowledge in the medium's mind, they would receive a lecture sometimes 2 to 3 hours long on any given subject. Well, on this particular series of trance lectures, James Morse's control, known as TNCNT, and in his own words, he would always add Mandarin second class, he chose the subject. And we're extremely fortunate that this series of lectures were not only transcribed at the time, but were published. Hence, we have access to them today. I first came across this from listening to Glyn Edwards at the Arthur Findlay College some years ago. I'm sure many of you either met him or know of him. And Glyn would do a lecture upon a particular book called Practical Occultism. And he'd go on for about an hour talking how marvellous and fantastic it was, telling you some of the things he'd learned, and at the end of it he'd say, the only problem is it's out of print and you can't buy it anymore. And I spoke to him about it. I said, Glyn, why do you do that? You build people up to be able to get about how good this book is, and then you can't buy it. He said, well, it's true, you can't. I think he missed my point. Well, I decided to go and get a copy of the book. I found one on the internet, a second-hand copy. I think I had to pay about £50 for it. But I tell you what, it was worth it. What I'm going to share with you now is only one small piece of information I gathered from that book. But I believe in everything I've learned. This is probably the most profound piece of information, the most profound discovery I made out of all of it. I felt this book was so important, I actually went and republished it myself. So all of this information is still available today for anyone who wants it. And I have to add, at a far more modest price. So, TN, in one of his trance lectures, talks about how the altered state of consciousness can be induced. Well, that, of course, is very interesting to me. And also, we'll get into the point of what we're talking about. And he talked about 3 different methods. The first one, he said it can be self-induced. We can learn how to self-induce an altered state of consciousness. And in my experience in talking to many people, and also being on as a tutor at the Arthur Findlay College on predominantly trance weeks over the last, I don't know how many years now, I've been going to the college for over 40 years. The majority of people I come across, when I ask them how the trance state is induced, they tell me about various practices they have. I do this and I'm going to trance, etc. Therefore, they are clearly self-inducing the trance state. Now, if the trance state was like a light switch, on, off, you're either in it or you're not in it, then it wouldn't matter. If the trance state, if the particular job we were going to do, or the Spirit would want to control us for, it was irrelevant what type of trance state you're in, again, it wouldn't matter. Because what we do know is there are many levels of consciousness ranging from a very light altered state all the way down to what we've termed as deep trance, where the medium's unconscious. So questions we've got to answer are, does it matter what level you're at? Does it matter how it's induced? And what I'm going to try and show you and explain to you is the answer to those questions is, yes, it does. So the first method he talked about was self-induced. Excuse me a moment. And I do believe that the vast majority, this is the method that they use today. Second method, third-party induced. This is a method that in general we use in training. I actually don't know of a medium, that's not quite true actually, I did know of a medium, but he's passed on now, where he was always third-party induced. This is something that in general today is only used in training exercises. It's something I use on many occasions with different students, and you can use a variety of methods. You could use autosuggestion. You can talk someone into an altered state of consciousness, various hypnotic techniques, and there's also magnetic passes which can induce it. Then there's the third method, the spirit induced. Now, when I was first reading about these 3 different types of induced altered states, the first 2 I understood very clearly because they were familiar to me. Up until that time, every time I had some kind of trance work to do, I would self-induce. In teaching, I was predominantly using, as a third-party induction, I was inducing it upon students. All of a sudden now, TN is talking about the spirit-induced state. And he further goes on to say something which is, this is the most important part. From the spirit world's perspective, by far the most important of these 3 is the spirit-induced. And this is the lesson I learned. All of a sudden, it was like a light bulb moment. Something had been happening to me for about 3 years prior to this that I didn't understand. And I hadn't really equated it with the job I was doing. Every time I had a trance healing sitting to do, for example, from about 5 to 10 minutes before the sitting, it would feel like a tiredness would come over my mind. And I'd always think, oh, must wake myself up, got a sitting to do. Go and do the sitting, self-induce the altered states. When I read this, all of a sudden the light bulb goes on, I wonder if that's what they've been trying to do for the last 3 years. So the next sitting, I didn't say to myself, oh, I must wake up, I've got a sitting to do. I allowed it to continue. And this tiredness that came over me, by the time I got to sitting down to do a trance healing sitting, I was already very much in an altered state of consciousness, mostly where I'd be by being self-induced. All I had to do then was simply let go, figuratively speaking, hand over to them, and we went into a far deeper state. they were able to exercise a degree of control that they've been wanting or attempting to do for the previous 3 years. So briefly now, we need to try and understand why it is that this is so important to the spirit world, why it's far more important to them than if we self-induce. And I want to go back to my analogy of a light switch. Firstly, if being in a trance state was like a light switch, either on or off, you're in it or you're not in it, it wouldn't matter who induced it. Also, if the trance state was just you're in or not in, there wasn't various levels, and those different levels made no difference. So regardless of whether you're in a light state or a deeper state, again, it wouldn't make any difference. But it does make a difference. And that's because there's a direct relationship between the level of consciousness of the medium and the particular job that the spirit controls want to do. What I'm going to do now is give you what I'd call a soft rule. Now, a hard rule is something that applies to everyone. A soft rule is something that applies to most, but there are exceptions. Excuse me. So the soft rule is this. Generally speaking, for a medium, a control medium, in the trance state for healing, they're going to be in the lighter to the mid-range altered state. For speaking, there's going to be an overlap, but the mid-range to deeper altered state, because the level of control to be exercised is going to be very different. And for the physical mediums, particularly going into the past, going back into the ectoplasmic era, because of extruding ectoplasm from within the medium's body, generally the far deeper trance states, because it can be quite unpleasant as they're trying to extrude the ectoplasm from the medium's point of view. So generally speaking, we have this graduation of the altered state, which is relational to the job they're going to do. And it still holds good today for the majority. So if we are self-inducing, how do we know what level of consciousness the spirit world wants us in for the job they want to do in this particular session? If we are prejudging what they're going to do, we're going to limit them. And I want to give you an example of this. I'm going back almost exactly 20 years, actually, because memory serves me correct. This was in June of 2000. A student at the Arthur Findlay College came for a trance healing sitting. At the start of the sitting, I was feeling my mind being moved into, all of a sudden, not the state I was expecting for a trance healing sitting, but a deeper state for the controlled speaking. And the control, instead of doing what they normally do, which is directing healing energies to the patient, they didn't do that. They spoke to her. And they just sat and spoke to her for 45 minutes. What I found out afterwards was that she was suicidal. She didn't need healing in the normal traditional sense. Physically wise, she was very physically fit, completely well and normal from that sense. However, she was suicidal because her fiance had just been killed. Totally unexpected shock of the accident taken to the spirit world. What she needed to was to be talked to by the control, which is what he did. Now, because they needed me in a very different state than for healing, if I'd been self-inducing the state because I believed we were going to do a trance healing sitting, I would have limited the controls in how they could have helped that lady. And they wouldn't have been able to talk to her because I wouldn't have been in the correct state they needed me in. So hopefully you can understand that. Now, when we're talking about healing, it actually gets far more complex than this. Just going to bring you back to me now. Just moving off Morse and TN for a moment. So, when we're talking about the control state for healing, the level of consciousness actually becomes even more vital. Because what we've learnt over the years is that there's a direct relationship between the level of consciousness of the medium and the bands of healing energies we can access. And I'm going to go into that in far more depth tomorrow evening. So I'm only going to skirt over it now, just as an example, but I will go into it in a lot more detail tomorrow evening, where we can identify 7 different levels of consciousness and the different bands of healing energies we can access through them. But just suffice to say, give an example. The level of consciousness is relational to the needs of the patient. For example, if patient A had what I would call heavy physical conditions, and by that I mean cancer, perhaps spinal injuries. I don't mean just a bad back, but spinal injuries where they would need to do some form of spinal correction. Maybe a disc is out of alignment, they want to realign it. I would expect to be in a far deeper state than average, because of the type of energies we need to access for those particular heavy physical conditions. If patient B, on the other hand, no physical problems, but their problems were entirely mental emotional, maybe depression, etc., I would expect to be in a far different state. Not deeper, actually far lighter. And if I'm going into the deep emotional system, I would not even be in a trance state at all. They'd move me into a very different state of consciousness. Now, I'm not going to go into any more depth in that because that's for tomorrow evening, where I will go into that in detail. But suffice to say, the level of consciousness that the medium needs to be in should be driven by the needs of the patient, because the level of consciousness is relational to the bands of energies we access. Now, if we're self-inducing, how do we know what the needs of the patient are? How do we know what level of consciousness to self-induce? If we're having it third-party induced, how do we know? Whoever's inducing a part, how do they know what to induce? Well, we could ask the patient, what's wrong with you? In my experience, most patients do not know the cause of their problem. They know the symptoms, they know what hurts. Many may have been medically diagnosed, but very often that does not tell you the cause. If you're going to treat people purely on the basis of what they tell you they want, many will not get what they need. The spirit world treats people on the basis within a simple guide, simple rules. They will do what the patient needs within the boundaries of what is possible in that moment. So decisions have to be made. But if they've got a medium who is self-inducing, then the medium is governing what the spirit world can do for a particular patient. We might be lucky, and by coincidence, self-induce a state they want us in. Well, I don't want to operate on luck. I want to maximize the patient's chances of being helped by the spirit world. And the one group of people that have all of the information are the spirit controls. They know the needs of the patient, they know the boundaries in which they have to operate, and that is the limitations of the abilities of the medium to access certain powers, and also the boundaries and limitations of natural law. And again, I'm not going to go any deeper into that tonight. We'll save that one for tomorrow. So in effect, what is happening is this. In most cases, in cases where people self-induce, they are creating a medium that has limited capabilities for the spirit world. And in general, what they do will be much of a muchness. And this is why you find with many healing mediums, they are very good at certain conditions, average at others, and very poor at other conditions, because they're only accessing energies from a relatively narrow band. No one medium in a single given state of consciousness can access the entire bandwidth of the energies available. The most useful medium to the spirit world is one with what we call that has a flexible mind, one where the controls induce the altered state and can control the level of consciousness over that medium, to move them to the level of consciousness they want them in for the particular job they want to do. And that's why the spirit-induced altered state of consciousness is so important to the spirit controls. Just pausing now so you can absorb that. I'm just going to slightly move on a little bit now because I want you to really take that on board, the spirit-induced altered state. Now, in studying different controlled mediums over the period we call modern spiritualism, that's from 1848 to the present day, one thing that I started to find was there seemed to be anomalies in what these mediums reported that was happening to them. Now, unfortunately, a lot of these mediums, they wrote very good books about all the things they could do, but very few of them actually tell you how they do it or what their experience was whilst it was happening. One of the early exceptions is Nettie Coburn. When she did write her autobiography, it was under the name of Nettie Coburn Maynard, which was her married name. But Nettie Coburn, as a teenager, in the 1860s, the early 1860s, was doing trance demonstrations, controlled mediumship demonstrations, in the White House for the President of the United States of America, Abraham Lincoln. During the American Civil War in the early 1860s, she was invited by Mary Lincoln, the President's wife, to go to the White House on numerous occasions to do trance sittings. To give an example of some of the things that happened, on one occasion in the controlled state, the control walked her over to a table where there was a big map spread out, and this was the eve of a big battle in the American Civil War. And the generals were there, and they'd drawn in where they thought the Confederate armies were and where they knew the Union armies were. And in the controlled state, the control corrected the Confederate army's dispositions. After the battle, it was proven to be correct. So that's a good example of superior knowledge the medium does not possess. Excuse me. Now, if we ask most people, what is Abraham Lincoln remembered for? Very high on that list is going to be the Proclamation of Emancipation. Now, oh dear. What is less well known, however, is why he decided to issue that, to make that speech. When he'd written it and he was considering it, all of his political advisors was telling him, don't do it. This will be the ruin of your political career. Yet, this young teenage girl, speaking in a very strange voice, a man's voice, a commanding voice, advised him, yes, you should do this. You should release your proclamation of emancipation. It will be the crowning glory of your political career. Who was right? Spirit world. But imagine that, though, the President of the United States of America listening to the voice of the Spirit coming through this young girl. I sometimes wonder if more recent presidents had access to the knowledge and intelligence of the spirit world, how maybe the last 20, 30 years could have been different. But there you go. They obviously don't, so they've not been different. Now, Nettie Coburn, very interestingly, states this. When she had a trance demonstration to do, she would sit down and she stated it felt like a tiredness would come over her. She would just allow it to happen and she would sink into an unconscious state. And she would wake up when it was all over with no memory and no recollection of what had taken place. Well, certainly this tiredness coming over was very familiar to me, but in the majority of cases, I have a recollection of what takes place. I have sometimes a high degree of awareness, if I'm in a light altered state. Very often, though, I have very little awareness, but I know I'm not unconscious. There's some awareness. It's almost like at times when you wake up in the morning, you've had a dream, You know you've had the dream, but you can't quite grasp what the dream was about. So after a trance speaking demonstration, I know I've done it. I know I've had some awareness during it, but afterwards it's difficult to grasp exactly what went on in any detail. And that's what Nettie describes initially, this tiredness, but then she says, no recollection, no awareness. And I'm thinking, oh, does that mean, what's wrong with me? Does that mean then perhaps I'm not a trance medium, a proper one? Reading more about many of these mediums of that era, and the majority seem to share that experience with Nettie, that they had no recollection and no memory of what took place. And then I come across Emma Hardinge-Britton, and she actually states in one of her books that at times she didn't really regard herself as a proper control medium as a trance medium, because she very often had some awareness of what took place. But not the only one then. So we seem to have this contradiction. And it was sometime later that this seemingly contradiction was resolved. And that is that there are actually different types of control mediums. It's very clear today when I talk to people that the vast majority of control mediums today have awareness of what's taking place. The majority always have some degree of awareness. There are others, like myself and Judith, that yes, we have awareness, sometimes we don't. But the likes of J.J. Morse, Estelle Roberts, Gordon Higgins, I remember him saying very clearly once he didn't remember things. And of course, Nettie, having no awareness, how is it we can resolve this seemingly different types? And then I started studying another control medium. Just going to share the screen with you again. And we'll move on from James and TM. And I want to talk to you a little bit about this lady, Gladys Osbourne Leonard. Out of all the mediums I've studied, up until discovering Gladys, I think James Johnson Morse was my favourite. Sorry, James, but Gladys is now my favourite. I would really like to meet this lady when I move on to the next stage of life. We're very fortunate in that she wrote 3 books during her life, and I've brought all 3 of them back into print, so all this information is available. Very, very interesting lady. She was actually an actress in theatre in London, and in 1914, believe if I'm right in saying June of 14, that's correct, she went professional as a medium. Prior to that, how she developed her control mediumship was rather interesting, quite possibly unique. She was in a play in London. She was only in the first act and the last act. So the majority of the play, she had nothing to do. So her and another actress who was only in the first and the last act, for the bulk of the play, the middle part, they went down into the boiler room of the theatre and they sat together, and Gladys developed her control mediumship over a period of several years. And then they'd go back upstairs, take part in the last act of the play. Quite an interesting story. By June of 1914, she was ready to give up her acting career and go professional as a trance control medium. I believe it's no coincidence it was then, because 2 months later, August 1914, there was a massive increase in the need for very detailed and accurate communication from the spirit world, because we then have the start of the First World War. I'm not going to go into that side of it anymore, but one thing I firmly believe is that the spirit world works to prepare aspects of mediumship for the needs of the day that we live in. Mediumship evolves to meet the needs of the day. By 1914, what had evolved was the ability for mass communication, moving more and more from the physical mediumship to the mental, because they needed communication on a scale unheard of before. But anyway, back to Gladys. She wrote 3 very interesting books. And in one of them, she talks about 3 types of control medium. And it resolved the dilemma I was in trying to understand why there's 3 different types. And she calls them, interestingly, type 1, type 2, and type 3. A type 3 control medium always has an awareness of what is happening, and the spirit can enhance existing abilities. For example, if the medium could play the piano, then in the controlled state, the spirit controls through the medium would play it better, or could play it better. But if you can't play the piano in the first place, they're not going to be able to. They're going to utilize and enhance existing abilities. That's the limitation there. And I believe today, the majority of controlled mediums are a type 3. Type 2 mostly has an awareness, but there will be times where there is no awareness of what is happening. Spirit controls mostly use existing abilities, but there will be times when they use one the medium does not possess. I'm a type 2. Now you might say to yourself, well, why have I chosen to be a type 2? Why don't I choose to be a type 1? I'll come back to that and I'll answer that. For example, with myself, yes, I mostly have an awareness, but there are times when I don't. An ability, I'll give you one example of an ability I do not possess. Whilst doing a demonstration of trance healing mediumship in the sanctuary at Stansted once, the patient chosen was a German lady, and during the demonstration, the spirit control spoke to her in fluent German. I know I can't do that. Whilst I understand a lot of German words, actually lining all those different words up into a coherent sentence so a German person understands me is beyond my ability, I can assure you. What I wanted to know was, and I asked the lady after the demonstration, did this sound like a British person speaking in German? She said, absolutely not. She said, I can tell you from the dialect of the control where in Germany he came from. And that actually impressed me, because I definitely know I can't do that. That is a superior ability. Because to me, when I listen to German, I can understand quite a lot of what's said, because I understand a lot of the big words, not the little ones that join it together, but I understand it. But I have to confess to you that wherever they're from, it all sounds the same to me. German's German. And when I'm in Switzerland and I mention this, and if there's any Swiss people listening now, you'll find this hilarious. I actually can't tell the difference between Swiss German and High German. I'm just waiting for the laughter to subside. It all sounds like German to me. So when this lady said, I can tell you where in Germany he's from his dialect, I knew that was an ability I don't possess. So very clearly on Gladys's scale, I'm a type 2. Type 1. A type 1 does not have an awareness of what is happening, and the spirit controls can exhibit abilities the medium does not possess. Clearly, Estelle Roberts been able to speak in up to 19 different, been known to have spoken in up to 19 different languages fluently, when she could only speak one normally. That clearly is exhibiting as a type 1. And also coupled with, she had no recollection or memory of what took place. Abilities she doesn't possess, and no awareness of what's taking place. So Gladys's scale of the 3 different types answers my dilemma in trying to understand why is it that many of these mediums of the past seem to be so much better than I appear to be able to develop to. We basically will fit into one of these 3 categories if we're able to allow ourselves to be controlled. Now, back to my question, knowing all this, why haven't I decided to become a type 1? Good question. And that's because you can't choose. It's really simple, this one. We can develop to the best of our capability, but there's a ceiling which each individual can achieve. Now, think about what it is we're trying to do. What we're trying to do, going back to our original definition, is to allow an external intelligence to have control over the medium's mind, and then through the mind to control the body. Another myth we need to dispel is they do not enter the medium's body. They don't wear us like puppets. We control our body through our mind. We make decisions and then we act upon them. If I wanted to leave this room right now, I would think about it. The first thing I do is thinking, okay, I want to leave the room. But the actual mechanics of standing up, walking out the room, I delegate that to a subconscious regime within my subconscious. I don't think, okay, I need to do this tendon, this muscle, I need to shift my weight, push on the floor to stand up. We just do it. But there's something in there that controls it all. So before any action, there's a thought and a decision. And then that decision is acted upon subconsciously. What we're trying to do, though, now with control mediumship is allow the decision, the thought, to come from an external mind. And then through the internal consciousness, as they overlay that mind, blending their own mental aura with the medium's mental aura, they can get those instructions through to the subconscious and control the body. So, excuse me again, I'm awfully sorry about this, bit of a dry throat. Now, what we're trying to achieve in allowing an external intelligence to control us is not normal, it is not natural. We know that simply because if it was, why isn't everybody doing it? They're not. 7 billion people on this planet are not trance mediums. We don't know the exact numbers, but the vast majority of the human race will not experience or practice mediumship in their lifetimes. We can't put figures on it. Just any type of mediumship, but I would suspect it's well under 1% of the human population will practice or develop mediumship. Out of that small percentage that will actively work with mediumship, what percentage are control mediums? Even smaller. And that, there's a very simple answer. The reason why most people are not being controlled by the mediumship is because they are normal. Pause to let that sink in. Because they are normal. And that is because a normal mind, a normal consciousness, which is 99.999 something percent of the human race being normal, has a normal mind. And they cannot allow an external intelligence to control them. Therefore, possession is not a reality. It's a medieval superstition. We can get obsession, of course, but that's forms of mental illness. But there is no such thing as possession. It's against natural law to be compelled by one mind to do something you don't want to do. We have built within our consciousness inhibitors between the brain, which is the physical organ that controls mechanical routines, and the mind, which is non-physical. In a normal state of mind, the two are embedded together, linked together. We know that when we die, there's a separation. The mind continues to function and exist in another dimension, whereas the brain and the rest of the body will either be burnt or buried, whatever. We don't need it anymore. However, what happens when we go to sleep at night? There are inhibitors between the mind and the brain that, for most people, normal people, come into action. Most normal people, when they go to sleep at night, you may be having very active dreams that are mentally very active, running around, maybe even fighting, doing whatever, but your physical body remains quite still. So there's no translation of the mental activity of the dream into a physical action. That's a normal person. So in sleep, the inhibitors, there's a temporary disconnect. So the mental activity of the dream does not get through to physical action. The body remains quite static. And some people experience something called sleep paralysis. You can wake up, and in the first few moments of waking, it feels like your body's paralyzed. And that's because they haven't reconnected properly yet. It takes a few seconds for some people to properly reconnect as they're waking up. However, there are some people who are not normal. So hands up all the normal people. Sorry, not me. Now, there are some people, a small percentage of the population, who have a defect or an aberration of the consciousness, that when they go into a sleep state, for example, this disconnect doesn't function properly. There is still some degree of connection. People like myself, I talk a lot in my sleep. I can be physically very active in my sleep. I've even had the controls talking to my wife while I'm asleep, and I have no recollection of it taking place at times, even doing healing on them at times. So they're able to control me while I'm asleep with no recollection. But even if I wasn't a medium, what I would experience, because I'm not normal, is that I have very lucid dreams. I even know when I'm dreaming. I'm very aware at times when I'm having a dream that it is a dream. And sometimes I think, I don't like this dream, I want to wake up out of it. I have precognitive dreams, but I can be very active. I speak sometimes in languages that can't be understood by anyone, probably gibberish. So there's a lot of activity. When my body should be still, it isn't. Now, this is the key to understanding why some people, a small percentage of people, can be controlled. When they're in an altered state of consciousness, and sleep is an altered state, if these inhibitors work properly, they could never develop as a control medium. However, if there's a small defect in them, then they can develop up until being a type 3. If there's a bigger defect, they could develop up to being a type 2. If they're completely defective and there is no real disconnect between the two, they could develop as a type 1. So this isn't something we choose. We are born with this aberration of the consciousness that gives us a latent capability to develop as a 1, 2, or a 3. I believe that for the years I've been developing and training now, if I had the capability of it being a type 1, I would have exhibited those capabilities years ago now. We've plateaued, we're ceilinged out as a type 2, and although there's still a lot of room for improvement, a type 2 is what I am, so I simply focus on being the best I can be. So just to recap, I'm just going to put a light on. It's starting to go dark outside. So we've got 3 types of control medium. The capability to be a 1, 2, or 3 is governed by simply what we are as we're born. It's not a development issue in the capability. Fulfilling the capability is a training and development issue and a practice issue, but we should all be striving to develop to be the best we can be, regardless of what type. We can all be of use to the spirit world, and of course God and the spirit world in many different ways, regardless of type. I'm just going to bring you back now. I'll go backwards because I forgot that slide was there, sorry. Recapping, we've got 3 types of control medium. As to which we're capable of is, we have no control over our potential, but we have total control over fulfilling our potential. 3 ways the altered state can be induced, but really there's only one that's we should be doing, and that is the direct advice from the spirit controls. As far as they're concerned, the spirit-induced altered state is by far the most important. Before I move on now to any questions, I want to just share with you some resources. These are some of the resources that some of this information came from. These are available, they're all still in print. Nettie Coburn, her autobiography, and includes about the sittings in the White House. Now, J.J. Morse, the book Practical Occultism, is included in a larger volume because what we've done is actually incorporated into a single book many of Morse's trance lectures from not just practical occultism, but other times throughout his career. And the complete Gladys Osbourne Leonard includes all 3 of her books. So those are the sources for a lot of this information. The other source, of course, is personal experience over quite a number of years. So I'm not going to go into any more depth on the healing side because I'm saving that for tomorrow evening. Now, if you go into the participants part, there should be a button that says raise hands. If you have a question or you need anything clarifying, now's the time I'm going to take questions. I'm not going to look in the chat box because it just scrolls up too quickly and I can't focus on a question. So if you raise your hand, I'll switch your mic on and you can ask your question. And if there's no questions, we'll all go home early. Ah, right, Michael, I'm turning your mic on. You're unmuted. Michael, if you can turn your camera on if you wish, and you can ask your question.
Okay, good evening. I really enjoyed the lecture. Thank you. My question is, you said like normal people, and I just, I don't know. The wording with normal. Just I don't know. Could you expand on that? Like, because from my understanding, I thought everyone has gifts and could possess some type of
Yeah. Well, firstly, I don't regard mediumship as a gift. I regard it as a skill.
As a skill.
Yeah. If it was a gift, how can we have a college? Would you go to the college and we give you the gift? We have a college because it's a skill that can be learned and can be taught. Yes, as with all other human skills, don't think of mediumship any different to other types of human skills in this one respect. How did David Beckham become very good at being a footballer was largely through practice, training and development, but yes, also he had an innate ability or in that direction. But it was a skill that was developed and evolved. He didn't wake up one day and could play football for England. Mediumship, in the same sense of any other human skill, is a skill that can be developed and evolved. However, like with every other human skill, a small percentage of people are going to be very good at it. The bulk of people average and some people not so good. And whilst I do believe that everyone can develop some aspects of mediumship to some degree, that's not the same as saying everybody can do all forms of mediumship. Now, with physical mediumship, we know there's a very small percentage of people have a capability to develop that, very, very small percentage. And the same with control mediumship. If it was normal and natural, I have to ask the question, why isn't everybody doing it? Walking is normal and natural for the majority of the human population. Yes, there are exceptions, of course, people say are paralyzed, etc. But the vast majority are born with the capability of walking, so they walk. Yet, the vast majority of the human population never will be a control medium or ever exhibit anything in that way. So do you understand what I mean by normal then now?
Yes, yes. So thank you for the clarification.
Do you need me to elaborate any further on that aspect?
No. Okay.
By normal, I'm purely referring to the connections between the mind, which is non-physical, and the brain, which is. It's those connections in a normal consciousness. When people go to sleep or in an altered state of consciousness, there's a disconnect. That's the normal one.
Okay.
Most people, when they go to sleep, are quite passive. So what we could say is, a strong indicator that an individual may have the potential to develop control mediumship, a very strong one would be someone who sleepwalks. Someone who talks a lot in their sleep, a lucid dreamer, someone who's physically very active in the sleep. I would see that as a strong indicator that they have a defect in that respect and have the potential to develop control mediumship. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. The next one at the top of my list now is Pamela. I'm unmuting you.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much. Just a quick plug for the Gladys, Osbourne, Leonard. I'm in the second book, The Last Crossing, and the formatting is very good because the print is big enough that it's quite comfortable to read. So I appreciate that very much, the way that you've published the book. I have a question for you, and it's actually in two parts. And it has to do with the fact that I've been listening to Gordon Higginson's lectures online, and I have a question about, he talks quite specifically about trance and about how he really discourages any type of practicing for trance on your own. Separately from mental mediumship. He says that quite specifically. In one piece of advice, he says, oh, okay, you could practice, for example, taking yourself in and out of sleep, but say no contact, right? And in another set of meditations, he talks about mediumship as being really secondary to, or as being part of a higher purpose, which is to achieve oneness with God, or attain oneness with God.
Yes.
And so for this time when we are alone and we cannot, I'm waiting, for example, to take a Foundation of Trance course in November. Do you have any suggestions for what we might be able to do as part of a preparation that would involve some form of training of the mind, or some development of awareness?
Yes, yes, I do.
From sitting in the power, or anything like, or some other exercises that you could do for the mental mediumship?
Yes, I do. But do you want me to also explain what they are?
Yes, please.
I did answer your question. Well, firstly, another of the myths we need to dispel. It is not dangerous sitting on your own.
Mm-hmm.
It's not dangerous for two people sitting to develop this. How can it become dangerous because one of them disappears? What changes?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
What I do believe is it can be extremely limiting sitting on your own,
Mm-hmm.
and to a large, it gets to a point where you won't go beyond a certain level of development. You won't develop the controlled mediumship sitting on your own for a number of reasons. One is we sit in a circle because the sitters provide power.
Mm-hmm.
There's a saying, people equals power. A person who's developing their medium, particularly controlled mediumship, in the early stages do not possess sufficient personal power.
Mm-hmm.
And many of you who are listening, I'm sure, have been to the college, and when you're driving home or flying home, or as you leave the college, you're going home, you kind of feel this, something's missing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the college, Stan said, you work to a certain level, you go home, it's like, what's missing? Power is missing.
Mm.
I went to the college as a student for about 16 years before I became a tutor. Go back to my church to practice what I was learned. It's like, why can't I work to the same standard as I could at the college? This answers power. Over time, you build a personal power.
Mm-hmm.
I can now go anywhere. It doesn't matter to me now where I go. I take my power with me. But I wasn't this developed at the beginning, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So we sit in circle, we sit with others because they power the event when we're first learning. So to a large extent, whilst I cannot agree it's dangerous sitting on your own, I can agree certain exercises are pointless sitting on your own. You don't have the power to sustain it. But there are things you can do, and an excellent preparation and an excellent ongoing experience. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this tomorrow evening, actually, so it'll get you to come back. Now, sitting in the power is not what I'm going to talk about. That's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is sitting specifically to allow the people who are going to work with you to develop a close mental relationship for the purpose of what I'm going to talk about more tomorrow, level 1 control, so we don't confuse it with type 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to talk about level 1 control and level 2 control. Mm-hmm. Level 1 controls control of the mind. Level 2 control of the body. Mm-hmm. I believe the majority of people, you don't need to have the aberration or the defect of the consciousness for level 1 control. It's for the level 2. Because remember, this defect is between the mind and the physical. Mm-hmm. So they can learn to control the levels of the consciousness, even if they can't get through to the physical. Mm. There are levels within healing mediumship where they don't need to control the physical. So we'll talk more tomorrow. What you can do, and thing I teach to all students when it's appropriate, is allocating specific time in the week. This is not sitting in the power, it's different. It's sitting to allow those that are working with you time to learn two things. One is for them to learn how to control your mind, and two, you learning how to allow them to control your mind, the level of your consciousness. It's a very specific thing. And this is about the spirit-induced altered state. If we don't give them time to learn how to do it to us, and ourselves time correspondingly to learn how to allow it to happen, they can't develop it. It's very much a learning experience for them, because each and every one of us is unique. How they do it is actually relatively simple. There's an element of the healing energy, and again, I'll talk more in depth about that tomorrow, that is projected at the consciousness of the medium. Now, when this energy is projected at a patient in a healing scenario, it's in a very broad band, and the effect feels like a gentle, soft warmth. And I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with that.
Yeah.
Now, this is the energy. So when it's projected at a patient, it's a general, overall calming effect. Now, that same energy in a narrow focused band projected at the mind of a medium doesn't just calm and relax, it'll induce an altered state. But each individual's tolerances to it is different. So they have to learn your particular sensitivity and tolerance to it. How much energy do we need to project at Pamela to get her mind to this level? Because that would be a different amount of energy than they apply to me, or to Daniela, or anybody else, or Mr. Lenovo Tab 2, unusual name. So because we're all unique and different, they have to learn how to work us, to control us. And that can only come through practice. So sitting specifically for an hour a week, or up to an hour a week, allocating this time for them with a specific stated purpose to allow them to learn how to control your consciousness, level 1 control, is an exercise you can do on your own. I believe it's an essential one for development as well. Has that helped?
Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I hope to see you at the college sometime.
I hope so too.
Next blue hand is Farah. I'm unmuting you, Farah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you and see you. Good evening.
Good evening to you too. Just had a little bit of a confusion, so I thought I'd run it by you. You said to get into spirit-induced, but normally don't we self-induce first and we automatically get picked up and then they take us? Because even if you're planning to go for a healing or anything else, do you not have to sit down and then relinquish control, or it's a different sort of? So if you could shed some light on that, please.
Okay, yes, no. Don't self-induce. Well, since I've learned how to, learned about the spirit-induced, I don't self-induce because I don't see the point. I become disciplined now to allowing them to induce the level of consciousness they want for what they want to do. I don't have any preconceived ideas about the job we're going to do. They do it. So I don't self-induce, then let them carry on, because I can be induced in a state they can't pick it up then. By self-induced, I'm locking them out of my consciousness.
So what exactly do you mean when you're saying you're self-inducing? I mean, normally we just let ourselves go, kind of, mentally.
People have all sorts. There's thousands of different methods. People have all sorts of visualizations. I've heard people say, well, I sit there and I visualize walking down a staircase, or I walk along a beautiful beach and my mind becomes very bad. Various things to pacify their own mind. However, to create a visualization in your mind, although it might feel calming and passive, you are very active in doing it. It takes a lot of mental power to visualize something. Effectively, what I do, and I'm stressing this and using words very literally, I do nothing. I've become very good at doing nothing. Quite literally, it's done to me. Okay. I don't ask for it, I expect it. And to tell you how I come to this understanding where I can be so adamant, I'll give you 2 examples. Normally at Stansted at 9:30 in the morning, we generally, if it's a big course with multiple tutors, one tutor takes all the students for a lecture in the sanctuary, the rest of us do sittings. On this particular morning, I believed I had sittings to do. It was think it was Finish Week actually a few years ago. And I believe my workroom was the library. So I went to the library at about 10 minutes before the first sitting, so I could allow myself to be prepared. Because I just sit there and wait, and this tiredness comes over me, and they just do it. So at 9:20, I'm sat in the library, got my chairs ready. I've got 10 minutes, which I like. I'd rather have a slow warm up than a quick one. 9:25, I'm sat there thinking, nothing's happening. I'm sat on my own. I don't mean no other physical person, but I'm literally on my own. For sod, they're getting a bit late. 28 minutes passed. I'm now thinking there's something very wrong. Nothing is happening. So I went to the door of the library. There's no patient waiting. And then I suddenly realised I got the wrong day. I should be in the sanctuary doing sittings. Doing the lecture, not the library doing sittings. If this was a subconscious or a subliminal self-induction in some way through expectation, the power of my subconscious expecting it to happen, why didn't it happen? I was expecting it to happen. And it didn't happen because they weren't there to do it. I had 2 minutes to get down to the sanctuary and do a lecture. So that was the first example, was that even though I was expecting this power to come over me, it didn't happen because there's no reason for it to happen. Now, the second occasion that reaffirms this, as Stan said again, we normally do 3 sittings consecutively. After the second sitting, I said to the translator, third one's not coming. She said, how do you know? I said, just wait, third one's not coming. And they didn't turn up. Now, this does happen occasionally. People forget, people get the wrong day, go to the wrong room, whatever. Third one didn't come. She said, how did you know the third one wasn't coming? I said, it's simple. After the second sitting, the controls left. They went for an early lunch, left me sat on my own. What is the only rational... Shut up. I don't want Siri. What is the only rational explanation for them leaving if we had a third sitting? There isn't one. Because in between sittings, they don't release my mind and start again. They hold my mind in what I call a holding stage between sittings, and then control the level again for the new patient to whatever level they need. Because although I do 3, and in fact, when I'm doing sittings elsewhere, I usually do 4 in a row, they'll move me to different levels to the needs of the patient. Well, after the second sitting, they just went. Why? No third sitting. So this is very important because I do recognise the power of our own subconscious. And if we have a strong expectation or a belief that something will happen, there's a danger our subconscious will deliver it.
That's the issue. And
that's a big problem with all kind of control development. However, on these occasions, nothing happened because the spirit world wasn't there to do it, regardless of my expectation. Is that, I can't remember what your question was.
No, absolutely.
Answered it.
Because I wasn't being able to correlate the difference between the 2 types, and now it's absolutely clear. Good. And I also don't tend to, think of stairs or anything like that. I do let it go.
People do all sorts of varying practices to move themselves from a normal state to what they call into the altered state. There's thousands and thousands of different ones, probably as many as there are people doing it. But in my experience, in talking to people, when I say, when you're going to do any kind of trance work, what happens? They tell me what they do. No one tells me. I sit there and wait for the spirit world to induce it. They say, I do this, this, and this. Therefore, they're self-inducing.
I don't do that, so perfect. I'm happy. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I don't see any more blue hands. Ah, yes, Denise. I'm going to unmute you, Denise, if I can. Yes. You should be unmuted, Denise, if you'd like to.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's a very enjoyable evening so far.
Thank you.
May I ask, I've been sitting in a trance, several different trance circles over many years.
Yeah.
But it's normally I sit for other people.
Yeah.
Now I have an understanding for myself that nothing is wasted.
That's correct.
While I'm sitting there. Is that right or is that wrong?
No,
for me
I would
to
agree.
develop.
I would agree that nothing's wasted, but we don't always understand in how it's used.
Yes.
So I agree that the basic principle, nothing is wasted, no energy is wasted. The spirit controls will utilise it one way or another, but we very often don't know in what way they're using it.
Okay. So would you suggest that perhaps if other people were interested, for them to sit for me to develop?
It's always worth trying, but the best thing is, I think first, initially, if it's possible, of course, because there's always costs involved to go on courses, you can go on a course where to find out if you have a potential.
Yes, yeah, I have been to the college.
All right.
Yeah.
So if you believe you've got the potential, then of course it's worth having people sit for you. But I also think it's very important to have the right people sit for you.
Oh, absolutely.
And I want to give an example of what can happen when the wrong type of people, not intentionally and not deliberately, but people with a lot of enthusiasm but very little knowledge are sitting for someone. Again, it was at the college a number of years ago, a group, not just one student, but a whole group came down to the college, I think from Scotland actually. They'd been sitting together, about 5 or 6 of them, for this one lady for something like 7 years. The lady was going to a very nice altered state, a personality was coming forward and talking, but they were starting to get a little bit suspicious. Now, we have a saying that it was all gravy and no meat. Now, I think many of you will understand that, but for those of you perhaps where English is not your first language, what it means is it was all very nice, but there was no substance in it. Now, when we think of our test for trance, we're looking for a superior knowledge or ability. They were not getting that. There was no demonstration of superior knowledge. The so-called spirit control was not giving them anything beyond the knowledge of what the medium could have created or made up from beyond their own knowledge. So it was failing in our fundamental test. And after 7 years, and the degree of what appeared to be control, I would have expected evidence of a superior knowledge by 7 years. So I sat with them. She went into a lovely trance state. A personality came forward and spoke. It was all very fluent and very nice. But there's one problem. Wasn't the spirit world. They weren't involved at all.
Yeah.
It was entirely from her own subconscious. And what had happened, they'd created an entire pseudo-personality. And I want to just explain briefly how this can happen. Take a group of people, lots of enthusiasm, but not a lot of understanding and knowledge of this, sitting for one person, and all it needs is one of the sitters to have a really good imagination. Now, your training medium starts to sit and develop. Now, you sit there and you start to relax. What happens to your face when you start to relax? It kind of sags a bit. Well, that's actually called gravity. That's not spirit control. It's gravity. It happens to all of us, even more so when you get older. Now, what happens is the sitter with a good imagination sees this, and in their mind, they're seeing a Chinese guide. I see a Native American guide. I see this. I see that. Now, your trainee developing medium is in an altered state of consciousness. That means they're in a very suggestible state.
Yes.
Something in that circle saying, I see a particular, this stage Chinese guide, goes straight into the subconscious when there's no control there at all. Next week, what does the subconscious try to do? It tries to deliver the expectations of the medium, because they're now expecting a Chinese guide.
Yeah.
So the sitters with good imaginations start seeing more and more. The subconscious starts recreating more. You're now in a spiral. Sorry, the message just come off my computer. I just want to get it out of the way because it's Bill Gates wants to update something. So they're now into this spiral of feeding the subconscious with a personality, and the subconscious playing back to them.
Yes.
After 7 years, they created an entire pseudo-personality. The problem is at that stage, it can be too deeply embedded to change. We were lucky. Now, as a teaching medium, the one thing that sets me apart from when I wasn't a teaching medium, just a medium, was I now have the ability and had to learn this, not just to get my own link with the spirit world, but with a student, I can also get their link. So I can sense what the spirit world are trying to do with a trainee. So
Yes.
if I'm seeing something that's happening that's totally contradictory to what the spirit world is trying to do, we know where it's coming from, the subconscious.
Yes.
Anyway, so I was aware that it wasn't the spirit world. Now, instead of just saying, "Oh, stop this, it's a load of rubbish," because the last thing we want to do is destroy anyone's confidence. What we want to do is steer them into a positive experience. So we brought it to an end. Sorry, no, before we brought it to an end, what I said was, I spoke to this personality and I said to, because I'm aware I'm talking to a subconscious, but I don't tell them that. I said to her, "I'm aware that there is another spirit intelligence who would like to talk through the medium. Would you mind stepping aside and allowing it?" What I found interesting about the subconscious, if you put a very sensible, reasonable request, it finds it very hard to deny you that request, because it's like giving itself away. So I politely asked, "Would you mind stepping aside and allowing, etc.?" The subconscious said, "Okay," stepped aside, allowed a second personality to come forward. And I was happy with that. That was a spirit control. And after a little while, I brought it to an end, and I didn't tell them what had happened. I asked the whole circle 2 questions first. Am I correct in saying that the first personality is the one that you've been getting for the last few years? They all agreed yes. Am I also correct in saying then that the second personality you've never witnessed before? Yes, that's correct. Okay, what's the difference? And the lady, the medium, said, "I now know it has never been the spirit world before, because I can now feel the difference."
Ah, that's
With no
good.
benchmark,
Yes.
with no previous experience. I don't think the majority of people who we'd say, "Oh, are fraudulent," I don't actually think they're fraudulent. To be fraudulent, you are deliberately deceiving people. What I think is happening is they're actually delusional. They believe what they're doing is right and correct, but it's not. They're in a delusional state. And that's not deliberate. That can happen because we're dealing with the mind of people where we're either inducing or self-inducing or having induced altered states of consciousness. It frees up the subconscious to do things. If you want to go and see a lot of people in an altered state of consciousness doing odd and strange things, go on a normal week, not during lockdown, go to the town centre on a Friday or Saturday night at 11 o'clock. Lots of people doing stupid things they wouldn't normally do. They're in an altered state of consciousness.
Yeah.
In their case, induced by alcohol. But their normal constraints over themselves have been removed and changed. We're putting people, or people are being put into an altered state, and it releases the controls over the subconscious. If we're not careful, the subconscious will manifest your deeply held beliefs, desires, or fears. And that's why one of the reasons for sitting on your own can not just be a waste of time, but could be counterproductive. So if you're going to sit in a home circle, great. Have someone present who knows what they're doing, because if you're the medium, you're in an altered state, you've no control over what they're doing. And it's your mediumship that they are working with. So my advice is always have someone present who understands the subject.
It is trying to find somebody of that like quality that you can trust, really.
Yeah. That's the big problem. Everybody wants to be the medium. Nobody wants to be a sitter.
Well, I've sat for years and years and years. Back in the day, sat with Diana Annabelle in a circle. Yeah, many years ago with friends, and that was a wonderful circle.
Good.
Really.
Okay. Well, thank you. I hope I've answered your question, Denise.
Thank you.
I'm moving on to D. So D, I'm unmuting you. I think. I'm trying to. It's not working.
I've unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now.
I think I joined the call muted, Stephen. I think that was the problem.
Everybody joined.
'Cause I didn't want.
It's set that people can't unmute themselves. I have to unmute people.
Oh, okay. And it's been a lovely evening, Stephen. Thank you very much. And it's a subject that I'm very new to. I've sat in a development circle with a very experienced medium and somebody I trust. And on a couple of occasions, we've done what he calls cabinet work.
Why?
Why? Sorry?
The trance?
Well, not necessarily for trance, just to see.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, just to see what happens, really. But the last couple of times I've done it, I have had spirit talk through me. And I was interested to hear that actually, because I was of the disbelief that actually when something like that happens, you didn't know what was around you, but I was still aware of a little bit that was around me and a little bit of what happened, although not all of it.
That's quite cool, that the majority will experience that.
He describes it as overshadowing.
Right.
Is there a difference between that and trance?
Yes, they're not the same things, actually. Firstly, I don't understand why you're sitting in a box. Makes no difference whatsoever. We're dealing with mental mediumship. The cabinets were introduced by certain physical mediums in the 1870s. And it was during the ectoplasmic era of physical mediumship. Mental mediumship, you can sit outside in broad daylight on a chair. It makes no difference. It's this that matters. A box makes no difference to mental mediumship.
Okay.
It's pointless sitting in it. So when we talk about overshadowing, that is usually something people sitting for the medium can experience through their own various clairvoyant experiences, that when a medium is starting to be controlled, the sitters who are clairvoyant can very often see another face appear. And we'd call that overshadowing, not to be confused with transfiguration.
Yeah, that's what people say. People have said that my face changed, but I also I spoke, as in it was my voice, but not my words, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Now, without being present, I can't give a definitive understanding.
No, I'm just.
But what it sounds like.
I'm just.
You're just what? Sorry.
I'm just curious to know, because I'm very new to this side of the mediumship. I do work as a medium around SNU churches, but I'm just very new to this side of it, and I just was curious to know what the difference was. But it sounds as if it was more like he said, overshadowing rather than.
Well, it may have been inspirational speaking as opposed to controlled. It depends. Without being present, it's hard to be definitive. But one is the route to developing the other if the capability is there. What I'd be saying is, if you've had that experience, then I'd be, if you're interested, of course, I'd be pursuing it through some form of development, either a training course or sitting in a circle, sitting with somebody.
Yes, I would be interested in carrying it on, because the last time it happened, I came out of it very, very emotional.
Yeah.
Quite shaky and very emotional, which shook me for a bit.
Yeah.
But I have seen other people come out like that, and I now understand it is the fact that spirit are coming so close.
Not necessarily. It could be came out of it too quickly. Particularly when you said shaky, you get a feeling almost inside. It's like a bit shaky, like this. In terms
yes, physically shaky and in floods of tears.
That's coming out of it too quickly in an uncontrolled way. It's you haven't got a control over you, and you effectively dropped out or came out of it too quickly, and you can have this reaction in the nervous system. It's something, if I was teaching you with the class, it's something I'd do something about it.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you very much.
Quickly, by getting you to allow them to bring you out, allow yourself to surface slower and more naturally.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. If you've got that shakiness, that is a side effect usually of coming out too quickly.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm going to go for Kathleen B. I've unmuted you. If you'd like to bring your question.
Yes, my question, I had several, you've been answering them as we go, which is fantastic. Thank you.
Good.
The question I wanted to ask was about the current state of affairs. If we want to develop this, do you see any value or an effectiveness in doing a group circle through Zoom and through these kind of contexts?
Yeah, to some extent, but I still think sitting physically with somebody present, I'm a bit torn on this because I'm uncertain, because I have a lot of experience over many years sitting with people in my physical presence, but actually trying to do that type of mediumship through this format for a developing medium, I don't have a huge amount of experience with that. So I'm not sure about one thing, and that is about power and power distribution. Now, whilst on one hand, I believe that the powers and energies we're dealing with are not confined by time or space, because otherwise, why would absent healing work? So on one hand, whilst they're not confined by time and space, the one aspect of it that would trouble me, having a student that is hundreds or thousands of miles away, who's not physically present, it's okay if everything goes right. What happens when something goes wrong and I can't deal with it? I don't know. Most of the students I work with, I don't know them. And with the best one in the world, we can have students who have come with certain mental or emotional baggage, can have an adverse reaction or something, and I can't deal with it so easily remotely as I can in person. If somebody has some kind of psychotic episode and I'm present, I can deal with it. But if I'm on camera with you and you're in California or wherever, and you walk off camera because you're having some kind of reaction that you don't understand, I don't know where you've gone. I can't then calm you down, I can't deal with it, I can't explain what has happened. So that's what would trouble me if something went a little bit wrong. I don't mean from the spirit world's perspective, but we have lots of people with lots of different types of emotional baggage that come along. You understand what I'm saying?
I totally do.
There are clearly people who should not be sitting for this type of mediumship. We're dealing with the human mind. And if we're in a stage of our life where we're going for a very difficult emotional time, deal with your life first.
Right.
We need to be in a stable state in our life to be allowing another consciousness to be blending with our own mind like that. We have to be stable in our own personality. This is why you should never let, this is why they won't do this with children. Their mind is too plastic and they haven't formulated properly their own personality. So if you're going through a very difficult time in life, which we all do, we all have our ups and downs, there's times when you shouldn't be doing it. If I'm dealing with a student by remote and I don't know them, they're going through a difficult time and they go off camera, how can I deal with it? That's my worry. Because I want this experience to be an amazing experience for people. And I want it to be safe. And it can be completely and totally safe if we understand it, respect it, and deal with it correctly. So that's my one worry. If I was working with people I knew and had prior knowledge of and knew then I think I could do it, it would work. But with total strangers, because at the college or wherever I work, very often this is a group of total strangers. Mm-hmm. I have no idea of their background or their history, but in a room I can deal with it. Online I can't. So I think I'd be happy doing it online with a group of people I had prior knowledge of. Perhaps if I'd worked with them once in the real world and I knew them, then I think I'd be quite happy.
Makes sense. Thank you very much. I have a really quick question to follow up with that. If you are in the presence of everyone and you're doing a trance session, what do you feel about the sitters around you actually giving feedback as you go? I know you mentioned earlier about the enthusiasts coming in and saying, oh, their face is changing and this is happening. How do you feel if someone's trying to go into trance and everybody's saying things, oh, I can feel the cold air, I can feel this, I can feel that?
Well, firstly, they shouldn't be trying to go into trance because that would be self-induced.
Ah, good point. Thank you.
But see, the language we use is important.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
They should be allowing the spirit world to induce the trance state. Now, it doesn't bother me, people talking. Noise never bothers me. But what you shouldn't be doing is saying, oh, I see a trying to identify what you think of as guides or controls, because you're immediately putting suggestion and thoughts into their subconscious. Now, to say you feel, okay, I can feel the energies building, mediums by their very nature are insecure people. You're sat there having your mind moved to an altered state. There's part of you still there, mostly thinking, oh, they're very quiet. I wonder what's going on. Your mind is then starting to go active, which is working against what the spirit was trying to do to make you go passive. So if you're starting to feel insecure and a bit paranoid, and when we're in an altered state, it's very easy to get a little bit insecure. So I actually like people talking about what they're feeling, sensing, but I don't want them talking about what they think they're seeing and identifying controls, particularly in the early stages. You're putting thoughts into the mind of the medium. But to say, I feel the energy going very cold, that's a good sign, or I can see energy building up around the throat of the medium. That kind of stuff I find very, as the medium, quite relaxing and calming. I'm quite happy with that.
Okay, thank you for
I
that.
remember sitting in a circle once, a long time ago. I just starting to, and I drift off. There was no spirit contact whatsoever yet. And somebody in the circle said, oh, I can see Queen Victoria. And I'm sat there thinking, no, you can't. There's no one here yet. Give me a break. And I immediately came out of it then, because I wasn't in it yet. That's what I mean by good imagination. I don't think I've ever looked like Queen Victoria, to be honest, hopefully. So, no insult to Queen Victoria, of course, but I don't think I look like her. I'm going to try for Fulvia again. I tried to unmute you. Have I finished with you, Kathleen?
Yes, thank you very much. That was.
I'll go for Fulvia. We have to make this the last one, Fulvia. It's not. Oh, no. I don't know what's wrong, Fulvia, but I keep trying to unmute you. And I think you're remuting yourself.
No.
Oh, there you are.
Didn't.
You're in now.
Good evening, Minister Upton. My question is just a clarification, and just when you were talking about you mentioned possession in some people think they can be possessed while in trance. Just asking a clarification about that.
Yes.
Because I don't believe it's possible, to be honest.
Yes, I stated, I thought, hopefully, and I'll just clarify, I do not believe there's any such thing as possession. I think it's I believe it's a medieval creation by people who didn't know better. Medieval medicine, anything they didn't understand, they put it down to demonic possession. And if they thought they understood it, they usually use slugs or something, or leeches to bleed you or cut you to bleed you, to let the evil demons out, etc. So we've moved on a lot since then. We understand that there are such things as mental illnesses and schizophrenia, etc. It is against spiritual law. It's a contradiction of the fifth principle for one intelligence to make another intelligence do something they don't want to do. Therefore, we can allow ourselves to be controlled. It is a state of cooperation with the spirit world. They cannot control us or make us do things against our will. Possession implies something's being done against our will. They cannot control us against our will. They're very clear on that. And I want to be very clear on it. So there is no possession. But we can have obsession, which is forms of mental illnesses.
Okay.
So am I clear? There is no possession.
No, because I completely. No. I completely agree with this concept. That's why I ask. No, I don't believe in possession. Absolutely. And of course, obsession is in the range of. That's why I asked the clarification, just to see if I got it right.
Good. Well, you have no possession. Doesn't exist.
Okay.
However, some people can believe they are, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that through their power of belief in something, they can create things, but there's no demons or external forces doing this. Evil itself is not a force within the universe. It's the misuse of free will. Mankind can do evil things, so, but no, there can't be possession. Now, coming to a close now. Tomorrow evening I'm going to continue, but particularly to focus upon the use of the trance states within healing mediumship, to identify 7 different levels of consciousness, and also to try and bring an understanding that what people are calling trance healing in reality doesn't exist. And I'll leave that thought with you. And if you want clarification, I'll see you tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, Steven. So before closing tonight, I will remember you that tomorrow evening, same room, same time, Steven will give the second part of this lecture. And on SNUI, you know, there are so many classes available. And for every information you need, please go to the tuition program, to the website, SNU website, and check the tuition program. But if you would like to have access to all of these many classes, you have to become an SNUI member, which costs very, very few. Just in addition to the SNU individual member is £1 per month. And if you would like to join SNUI without being SNU individual member, it will cost you less than £2 a month. So, and as you know, the SNU, the Spiritualist National Union, is a charity, and we rely much upon donation. So I'm writing and copying here in the chat now the link where, if you want, you can donate something. Thank you very much. Thank you, Steven, and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.